This is from iBooks. It's a sample. Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Shadow. Brian Freeman, it says underneath that. Penguin Random House. Prologue 10 years ago. The young man in the rusted Renault blazed around the curves of the Swiss mountain road. Shadows lengthened around him. It was almost dark. On one side of the car, the granite of the cliff face rose over his head like a craggy, pitted wall. On the other side, inches away from his squealing tires, the land plummeted sharply toward the black lake at the bottom of the valley. He swung the wheel back and forth as he climbed higher, and the old Renault gripped the road like a wild goat clinging to a rocky ledge. He needed to slow down, but he was late, and he couldn't afford to be late. Not with these men, not on his first mission. His fears came in a rush, fueled by a spike of adrenaline, the road, the men, the meeting, and Monica. Geez, where was Monica? Her apartment near the college was empty, stripped of everything she owned, as if she'd never lived there at all, as if she'd never even existed. He'd loved her. He'd wanted to marry her. And she'd betrayed him. Now she was gone. Thinking about Monica was a mistake. Focus. Be in the moment. That was what an agent had to do. But his mind drifted from the road and he misjudged the next turn. One tire of the Renault scraped over the cliff's edge and the car lurched. His stomach somersaulted with panic. He twisted the wheel, overcorrecting, and the vehicle slammed into rock with the screech of metal and a spray of broken glass as the left headlight shattered. He hit the brakes, jerking the car to a stop. His head sank forward, his heart pounding. His handler, Nash Rollins, had warned him about moments like this. Despite all of his training, he wasn't ready. Reality was different in the field. He hadn't learned yet how to smoothly break down his thoughts, organize a plan of action, and tackle each threat one by one. Nash had said that his confidence would come with time, that he should be patient with himself while he gained experience. You have unique skills, unique intellect, but professionals are built, not born. Until then, all he could do was close his eyes and breathe, forget the distractions, and remember the mission. The mission is everything. Treadstone. But how could he shut it all out? Everything was happening to him at once. A year ago, he left his home in Paris to become a teacher of language and physical fitness at a private college outside Zurich. He'd found himself in a small Swiss town in the mountains, in love with a beautiful woman. Then Nash Rollins had appeared, sent by David Abbott, the closest man he had to a father, the man after whom he'd been named. Nash had told him the real reason he'd been brought to the college and explained the rules of the agency that Abbott expected him to join. That was how his Treadstone recruitment had begun. Now, there was a Glock in a holster in the small of his back, and a knife strapped to his ankle. Now, Monica had vanished. Now, the life of David Webb was falling apart. No, you are not. David Webb, you are Cain. He drove again. Ahead of him, the road leveled off at a meadow, framed by jagged snow-capped peaks in the distance. He drove in and out of low clouds that blew across the fields. The cold made its way through the windows of the Renault and got under his skin. Up here, the road was nothing more than 2 rutted dirt tracks, and the car bumped forward over the emerald-colored hills. He didn't have to go far. Not even a mile later, he spotted the chalet, the meeting point. It was built of wood and flagstone, with an A-frame roof and huge windows on all sides, looking up toward the mountains and down toward the distant valley and lake. 3 other vehicles were parked outside, 2 dark SUVs, and a sleek Ferrari in a metallic color that looked like deep purple. One man stood in the tall grass, a semi-automatic rifle level at his waist. A man? No, he was barely more than a boy, 19 years old. David knew him as a student in his modern language class. His name was Gunther, from Mannheim, son of the number 3 executive at one of Germany's largest auto manufacturers. He was the kind of boy who would have money and power handed to him, based on nothing more than his family pedigree. Someday he'd be CEO of that company. Gunther was one of them? But Nash had said Le Renouveau was a hungry spider, trapping the young European elite in its web and wrapping them up to use them in the future. That was why it had to be infiltrated. That was why it had to be destroyed. The others were inside. They were waiting for him. David parked his beat-up Renault next to the Ferrari. It was a 458 Italia hardtop model. As he got out, he noticed that the plum-colored sports car had no registration plate. That was the kind of detail Nash had told him to watch. Gunther met him as he got out of the car, with the rifle pointed at his chest. "Willkommen," the boy said, but the welcome had no warmth. "Hello, Gunther. Bitte kein Namen nicht hier?" I guess that's in German. David nodded. No names. It didn't matter that they knew each other. Up here, no one had names. "Haben Sie Waffen?" "Natürlich," David replied. "Gib mir alles." David hesitated. If he declined to hand over his weapons, this rich kid would probably shoot him. He did not like the idea of walking inside unarmed, but his goal wasn't to kill anyone. The people in the chalet were nothing but gatekeepers, just leaves on one branch of a large tree. He needed them to accept him, to believe he shared their goals. Once they did, he could gather intelligence on the entire operation, find their strengths and weaknesses, find the men in power. Le Renouveau. He moved slowly. Never make sudden movements when a man is pointing a gun at you. Treadstone. He spread his fingers, opened the flap of his coat, and handed Gunther the loaded Glock. He thought about not disclosing the knife, but if they searched him and found it, they'd probably use it to cut his throat. So he pulled up the cuff of his slacks and removed the dagger from its scabbard and gave it to the boy. Smart move. The next thing Gunther did was sling his rifle over his shoulder, turn David around and force him against the Renault, and give him a pat down from head to toe. The kid spent more time than was necessary between David's legs, and grinned as he did so. But the search was thorough. Gunther definitely would have found the knife. Then, rotating the rifle again, the young student gestured at the chalet door with the barrel. David headed that way. Another student met him at the door, armed with the same kind of rifle. This one was Mario from Madrid, son of 2 Spanish lawyers with political connections, the top student in David's fitness class. Whenever David had seen him outside class, Mario had a different girl on his arm. He always wore a grin like a mask, and his teeth looked especially white against the gloomy shadows of the mountain estate. Der Professor kommt, he announced cheerily from behind his smile. Was für ein Vergnügen. Then his smile disappeared as he said to Gunther in accented German, Du hast ihn durchsucht. Ja, alles klar. With the confirmation that David had been searched, Mario led him from the foyer and down a couple of steps into a vast great room with a high-angled ceiling. Lush carpet sank under his feet. Tall windows on 2 sides looked toward the mountains and valley, but the windows had been swathed in heavy drapes, blocking out the view. A couple of sconces on the timber-sided walls, and a fire in the flagstone fireplace threw strange shadows. 2 other men stood on either end of a 4-paneled room divider, which had been painted with a mural of wildflowers. David couldn't see what was behind the divider. He recognized the 2 men as he'd recognized the others. One was another student, an orphan and math prodigy from Prague named Lucas. The other was an economics professor at the college, in his mid-20s like David, a Cambridge Brit named Gavin Wright. They'd had drinks a few times in the year David had been here. Gavin was the one man David had expected to find at the chalet, because Gavin had been his first contact. According to Nash, Gavin Wright was the local field man for Le Renouveau, the one tasked with unearthing the political views of teachers and students and determining who might be potential recruits. So, 3 months earlier, David had made a point of drinking too much and going on a rant about Muslim immigration in front of Gavin. Not long after, Gavin had floated the idea of introducing David to some people who shared his disgust with the leftist leadership of Europe and were committed to shaping a very different future for the continent. They were looking for men like David, Gavin told him, men who appreciated the hard choices that would have to be made. Was David interested? Yes, he was. After that first meeting, David had worked his way up the chain, answering their questions, passing their tests, submitting to their background checks, all the way to the formal initiation ceremony on the mountainside. Here, tonight. He would finally be accepted as an official member of Le Renouveau. Treadstone would have a mole inside the most poisonous neo-Nazi cell in Europe. Gavin nodded at David from his position beside the painted divider, but he did not move. He wasn't the man in charge. David realized there was a fifth person in the great room, a man seated in the corner near a staircase that led to the second floor of the chalet. His face was almost invisible in the shadows. All David could see was firelight glinting on silver-framed glasses and long legs, ending in shiny black boots. A cloud of cigarette smoke blew out of his mouth toward the high ceiling. Gunther nudged David with the point of the rifle, and David knew what to say. Gavin had already explained the protocol. Ich bin hier der Sache mein Leben und mein Treue versprechen, David announced. Sorry, I'm assuming that's German language spelled out, typed out in normal, with the normal American alphabet, but I have no idea what any of those mean, nor do I know how to pronounce them, so I wish I did. And a pause. A long silence followed. David squinted, trying to see the man in the corner more clearly, but his face remained little more than a ghost, hidden beneath smoke and shadow. David had a sense of glittering eyes. Were they blue? But he couldn't be sure. He saw the man's arm move with languid slowness, stripping the cigarette from between his lips. Auf Englisch, bitte, the man said. Sie ist ein Amerikaner. That voice. David was sure he had heard it before. It was familiar to him, but he struggled to place it. Who was this man? But David couldn't stay silent any longer. I am here to swear my life and loyalty to the cause, he repeated in English. Yes, that is better, the man went on. Americans sound so foolish when they speak anything but English. 90% of Americans can't order a fucking cup of coffee in another language, but you amassed so much power that you made the rest of the world learn English in order to cater to your ignorance. Remarkable. I speak 5 languages fluently, David pointed out. Oh, yes. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about you. And I say this with nothing but admiration for America. What's the point of having power if you don't use it? He took another drag on his cigarette and offered up a nasty chuckle. Of course, having made English the official language of the world, now you're doing your best to give it up for yourselves, aren't you? David listened to the man's voice, still trying to pinpoint why he knew it. The man obviously wasn't German or American himself, despite his perfect pronunciation. His raspy voice shifted uneasily between languages, but there was no obvious giveaway of his native tongue. If he'd been speaking Italian or French or Polish, he probably would have sounded different with each one. It made David think the man was trying to hide his true identity. We know each other, don't we? How? America has forgotten the unum, David replied. Now it's e pluribus. Indeed, but Europe is no better, letting heathens flood our borders. I agree. So I'm told, the man said. eyes shining in the firelight. You come highly recommended, but our group searches for much more than philosophy in our members. Philosophy is cheap, easily put on, easily shrugged off. My people say you are blessed with the unique combination of brains and physical skills. That is the kind of man we need, the kind of man who can go far in our organization. Well, I'm pleased to hear that, David said. That's what I want to make a difference. Excellent. The man's voice turned sharp like the edge of a razor. However, I'm sure you can appreciate that we need to be careful about whom we invite to join us. The oath you spoke about, life and loyalty, isn't just words. It must be backed up by action. That's the only way for us to trust that you are a friend and not an enemy. There are spies everywhere who seek to take us down. I understand. Then I have an assignment for you from someone who intends to go far. Much is expected. What is it? The man behind the cigarette smoke and the silver glasses gestured with a flutter of his hand at Gavin, who stood beside the elaborately painted screen. Gavin slowly slid the screen closed in accordion style, meeting his partner on the other end. The two men lifted the heavy screen and pulled it aside, revealing what was hidden behind. A woman sat in a wooden armchair, wrists and legs tied, a black hood covering her head and neck. Oh my gosh, no. She was unmistakable. He recognized her body, the shape of her torso, the wavy blonde hair at her shoulders, the curve of her legs. He'd made love to her 100 times. He was in love with her. This was the woman he was going to spend the rest of his life with. Monica. Gavin yanked off the hood, and there she was. That perfect face, oval and slim. Tan skin from sunny days on the ski slopes. Dark, wickedly angled eyebrows. Nose soft and small. Deep red lips. Seeing that face made him want to touch her. Kiss her, hold her, protect her. But she was in danger because of him. Her luminous blue eyes were wide with terror, her mouth gagging into silence. Her ears covered so she couldn't hear a word of what was happening around her. She stared back at him in shock and confusion, with no idea why she'd been kidnapped and taken here, why she was being held by men with guns, why David was in this room with them. I believe you know this woman, the man in the corner said from the darkness. David had to drag the words from his chest. I do. Fine. Then you will kill her, please. David blinked, his mind going blank, the words not even registering in his head. What? Kill her. I have no weapon, he protested, hunting for excuses, stalling for time. A soldier needs no weapons to kill, the man snapped in an oily voice. Are you our soldier? Then follow my orders, do it now, or I will instruct my men to fire, and they will kill you both. David tried to remember his training. He tried to hear Nash's voice in his head. What to do next, how to salvage the mission, how to save the woman he loved. But there was no middle ground left for him. The mission was already blown. He'd failed. He'd moved too fast, pushed too hard. They didn't trust him, they knew. Of course they did. They'd known from the beginning that he was a spy. This had always been a trap. And now he and Monica would both die for his mistakes. No! David Webb might fail. David Webb might die, but not Cain, never Cain. Cain was a survivor. He was the man David Abbott had raised him to be. He was a killer. He was Treadstone. As you wish, Cain said. He marched toward the woman in the chair. The barrels of 4 rifles followed him, ready to fire. The closest was in the hands of Gavin, 6 feet away, just out of his reach. It would take 2 steps to reach him, but that was 1 step too far. If he tried, the bullets would riddle his body before he got there. Cain stood behind Monica, who squirmed below him, struggling against her bonds, screaming into her gag. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but he couldn't. His boots snapped together. He came to attention. I am here to swear my life and loyalty to the cause, Cain announced loudly. Then he placed his hands on either side of Monica's trembling head and prepared to break the neck of the woman he loved. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Present. Jason Bourne watched the hot Paris summer get even hotter. The protests in the Place de la Bastille began to descend from unrest into violence. Soon there would be rocks and bricks thrown, fights in the square, cars on fire. It had been happening that way for weeks. The young people, sweat pouring down their faces in the blazing August sun, hurled themselves at the police in their riot gear. At least 50 students had stormed the plaza and the Colonne de Juliette as if it were the year 1789 again, and they were launching another French Revolution. The rest of the crowd, 100 strong, spilled into the surrounding streets. They chanted and marched and waved flags bearing the words, La Vraie, true, as in true France. That was the name of the far-right political party that was threatening to shock the world by winning the next French election. Bourne sat in an outdoor cafe on Boulevard Henri the 4th, directly across from the plaza. The restaurant had been crowded when he arrived, but the other tables were mostly empty now. As the protesters filled the square, the paying customers had scurried away to the nearby metro station, leaving behind half-eaten cheese plates and cold cups of espresso. Everyone knew what was coming. He studied the crowd with an analytical eye. Automatically, he looked for the investigators, the hidden hands directing the mayhem. These kinds of protests rarely turn into riots organically. Someone was always there to light the spark with a well-timed knife thrust or a Molotov cocktail. He spotted at least 6 of them working the crowd, dressed in black robes and wearing Guy Fawkes masks. Bourne could see the wires of radios leading to their cars as they fed instructions back and forth, fomenting chaos. Maybe they were truly part of La Vraie, trying to unleash populist anger that would sweep them into power. Or maybe they were agents of the ruling party, hoping to stir a backlash against the violence spreading around the country. Or maybe something else was at work. Truth is what you can make people believe. Treadstone. It was Thursday afternoon. Bourne always came to this cafe on Thursdays. He sat at the same table, ordered steak au poivre, and left an hour later out of the Bastille station to return to his apartment on the north side of the city. He spent the hour watching the street to see if anyone was watching him, but Most of all, he kept an eye on the metro sign above the escalators. If there was a hashtag symbol on the sign in orange chalk, that meant he had a message waiting at a boutique hotel 2 blocks away off Rue Saint Antoine. A message from Abby Laurent. But no, it had been 7 months since Abby had said goodbye to him in Quebec City, and there had been no message since then. Not that he expected one. Abby had moved on with her life and left the world of Jason Bourne behind her. Their affair was over, and yet he kept coming back to the cafe. Every week, as he sat over his fiery pepper steak and a cold bottle of Kronenbourg 1664, Jason thought about sending her a message. He'd set up the communications protocol at the back door so that it worked in both directions. If he scrawled the hashtag on the metro sign himself, then someone, a lawyer, but he didn't know who, would collect a note for Abby at the same time. Rue Antoine Hotel. Oh, for Abby at the same Rue Saint Antoine Hotel. Jason rubbed his fingers over the orange chalk in his pocket. He always had it with him, but he'd never used it. The only thing he could say to Abby was that he was still in love with her, but that was the worst thing he could tell her. He needed to let her get on with her life, and he needed to do the same thing. Forget Abby Laurent. But he couldn't. That was a terrible irony for Jason. The things he wanted to forget were burned into his memory, and the things he wanted to remember were lost in the mists of his brain. A few years earlier, he'd been shot in the waters off Marseille. The injury had robbed him of his identity. His memories of who he was had been erased, and all that was left behind were the skills of a killer. His whole past was lost in shadows. Only a few fragments had begun to come back recently. Isolated bits and pieces like snippets from a movie. Missions, deaths, places, people. For months, strange things had triggered him. Smells, sounds, and faces brought unexpected recollections. But none of it felt real. It felt as if those things had happened to someone else. He didn't know what to believe. Bourne smelled smoke drifting his way. In the plaza, he saw an arc of fire as a police car erupted in flames. Paving bricks crashed through the windows. From the opposite side of the square, where the police gathered, water cannons blew people off their feet. He heard a series of loud bangs, and tear gas rose like a cloud, blowing toward him and stinging his eyes. Amid the bedlam, he saw the men in the bone-white Guy Fawkes masks calmly moving among the crowd, seeding pockets of disruption. Wherever they went, blood trailed in their wake. It was time to go. But before he could stand up, a voice interrupted him. "Les enfants, eh?" He got sideways. The table on his left was no longer empty. A man sat there, heavy-set, about 50 years old. His age didn't make Bourne let down his guard. He wasn't Treadstone. Kane knew the look, but with a glance, Jason assessed the man's upper body, strength, and realized he was formidable. The man made no attempt to hide the pistol that was holstered under his gray check sport coat, but he kept his hands on the table, fingers spread wide, an obvious signal that he intended no harm. The man nodded at the chaos unfolding steps away from them. C'est toujours les enfants? No, it's not the children, Bourne replied in English. They're just the foot soldiers. Someone else is orchestrating this. You mean our friends in the fox masks? The man said, also switching to English, although his accent remained French. Well, they could be children too. Je ne sais pas. It's hard to tell without faces, but I get what you're saying. The orders come from elsewhere. Formidable and smart. Who are you? Bourne asked. A woman who goes by the name Vandal sent me to find you, the man told him. I'm supposed to give you a message. Vandal. That wasn't a name Bourne was expecting. Unlike this man, Vandal was Treadstone. She was an attractive black woman, tall, lean, and tough. They'd done a mission together in Barcelona 3 years earlier, and he'd crossed paths with her again the previous summer outside a house in Maryland. The house where an agent named Nova had died. Yes, Bourne knew Vandal, but why was she sending him a message, and why was she going outside the Treadstone network to do it? If Vandal sent you, she knows I'd ask for confirmation that the message came from her, Bourne said. She'd also want to be sure you're talking to me. Another firebomb in the Place de Bastille rocked the street. Neither man flinched or took his eyes off the other. Yes, of course, the old man replied. She said I should ask to see the coin. Jason knew what coin he meant. He kept it in his pocket. A Greek coin encased in a pendant that Nova had worn her whole life. He'd taken it from her body when he found her in Maryland. Vandal was the only person, other than Abelard, who knew he'd done that, so asking about the coin was her way of letting Bourne know that the man in front of him was genuine. Vandal was also smart enough to know that Bourne would have the coin with him. He always did. He dug for the chain inside his pocket and opened his palm long enough for the man to identify it. When the man nodded his satisfaction, Jason tucked the coin away again. How did you find me? Bourne asked. Vandal doesn't know where I am. Not specifically, but everyone knows Kane's home base is Paris, the man replied. I have my own sources. It only took a few days before someone spotted you. You are not as much of a ghost as you'd like to think. Bourne frowned. Why did Vandal want you to find me? To deliver a warning. You're being hunted, Kane. By who? She does not know. She also does not know why. Although I imagine there could be any number of people who would like to track down Kane, yes. But it doesn't appear to be the usual suspects. Russia, for example, there's no chatter from that direction despite what you did to their assassin Lenin last year. Oh, yes, my friend, I know about that too. How did Vandal discover the threat? Jason asked. By accident, it seems. She needed a cleaner for a particularly bloody scene. Apparently a man you'd used yourself for similar services in the past. When she got there, she found him in his apartment, almost dead. He'd been tortured for information. She was able to save his life, and he told her that the men who'd done this to him were looking for you. He didn't know where you were, so he couldn't tell them anything, but they weren't going to leave him behind to talk. Who was this resource? His name is Gabriel Wildhaber. Bourne shook his head in puzzlement. That makes no sense. I've never used a cleaner by that name. I don't know him. Are you sure? It took Jason only a moment to understand what the man meant. He didn't remember anyone named Gabriel Wildhaber, but his memory only went back as far as that moment in Marseille that had stolen away his life. It was possible he'd used Wildhaber on a job in his forgotten past. If that was true, then the hunters might be part of his past too. Where is Wildhaber based? Zurich, the man replied. Zurich. Jeez. Yes, Zurich had been a part of his life before and after he lost his memory. It drew him like a magnet. It was the first place he'd gone after Marseille to find his identity. But even years later, the time he'd spent in Zurich before his injury remained a mystery, and all he knew of Zurich afterward was death. The Gemeinschaft Bank, a killer in an elevator. Wherever he'd gone in Zurich, assassins had been hunting for a man known as Jason Bourne, just like now. Who are they? Across the heat of the street, the violence of the protests crept closer. The riot spilled out of the square, young people screaming and running. The burn of the tear gas getting thicker, bricks flew. He saw unconscious bodies in the street, blood pouring from head wounds. At the cafe, a window shattered inward, spraying them with glass. He spotted knives in the hands of people escaping toward the sign. And guns, too. Some of the masked men had guns. We should go, the man said. Chaos can be a cover. The danger isn't just in Switzerland, Kane. What do you mean? I believe men are looking for you in Paris, too. I told you, I have sources. One of them made the mistake of using your code name. 24 hours later, the police pulled him out of the river. And Vandal has no idea what this is about? Bourne asked. No, but Wildhaber mentioned a Zurich cafe. The Drei Alpenhauser. She said that would mean something to you. Jason felt a pounding in his head, a sharp pain exploding behind his eyes. The Drei Alpenhauser. A restaurant only steps from the lake. The cafe had practically been his Treadstone headquarters when he'd operated in Zurich. He'd been there countless times. He'd used it for contacts and drops. He'd gone there after Marseille, and they'd recognized him at a time when he didn't even recognize himself. They knew him as Kane. They knew him as Jason Bourne. Wildhaber said someone at the Drei Alpenhauser had been asking about you, the man continued. One of the killers? He didn't think so. He said a woman had been at the cafe several times, looking for anyone who knew you. She said she needed your help. Vandal went to the cafe to see if the woman showed up again, but she got called away on a mission. That's when she reached out to me and asked me to find you. Did Vandal get a name for this woman or a description? No name, young, late 20s, blonde hair. The man suddenly stopped talking. He stopped because he was dead. What looked like a fly landing on his forehead was the hole left by a bullet tunneling soundlessly into his brain. As the man slid off the chair, more bullets hit the windows behind Bourne and ricocheted off the metal table with sharp pings. He threw himself to the ground, drawing his Sig Sauer into his hand, and rolled onto his stomach, arms extended. Near the escalator leading down to the Bastille station, a killer in a Guy Fawkes mask fired his handgun, emptying his magazine at Bourne. bullets kicking up concrete shrapnel that flew like razor blades. Jason drew a bead on the man, but panicked people flooded the sidewalk between them, and he had no shot. When the killer's gun was empty, Bourne scrambled to his feet and charged. The masked assassin jumped down the stairs toward the metro. At the station escalator, Jason leaped the fence and landed hard on the moving stairs. He shouldered his way through a crush of people into the underground and swung left and right, trying to find the killer among hundreds of bodies. But he was too late. At his feet, he saw a black robe and cowl, like something a monk would wear, plus a white plastic Guy Fawkes mask being kicked and trampled by people running for the trains. The killer had shed his disguise. He was gone. Bourne hiked back to the street. He wiped blood off his face where it had sprayed from the gunshot that killed the man. Outside the cafe, police had already begun to gather around the dead body. The body of the man who'd come to deliver a warning. "You're being hunted, Kane." Jason melted into the ground. He needed to be gone before someone pointed him out to the police. He didn't bother heading to his Paris apartment. If that man could find him, then others could too. His apartment was blown. Instead, he marched south on Boulevard Bourne, leaving the madness behind him. 15 minutes later, he was at Gare de Lyon, in the ticket line for an SNCF high-speed train to Switzerland, Zurich. Bourne had to go back to where everything was dark. He had to return to his past. 2. Jason stood in the shadows of a hotel located on a side street off the bustling Falkenstrasse. He could see the twilight waters of the Zurich Sea 1 block away. A taxi passed in front of him, and a middle-aged couple got out on the far side of Dufourstrasse. They were elegantly dressed, as if they'd come for a late dinner after an evening at the symphony. The man paid the driver, and then he and his wife strolled inside the cafe on the corner, passing below its distinctive logo of 3 wooden triangles set against white stone. 3 Swiss chalets, the Drei Alpenhäuser. Jason felt his chest tighten, choking off his breath. Sweat gathered on his neck. Years ago, after Marseille, he'd been drawn to this planet by nothing but instinct, remembering those strange triangles. He'd known that this restaurant was important to him. He could recall exactly how it looked inside, with heavy crossbeams along the ceiling and romantic candlelit booths, but he hadn't known why. Gosh, he'd been young then. May as well have been a lifetime ago. He tugged up the collar on his jacket. Cool air blew off the lake, rustling his close-cropped brown hair. He reminded himself to be in the moment. A man named Gabriel Wildhaber had been tortured and nearly killed by people hunting for Bourne. If the killers knew about Wildhaber, then one way or another they knew about the Drei Alpenhäuser. So it stood to reason that the cafe would be under surveillance. Where were they? He eyed the street leading to the lake. The sidewalk tables, the doorways, the parked cars. There were plenty of people enjoying a Swiss summer night, but no one paid special attention to the comings and goings at the Drei Alpenhäuser. Then he realized he was looking in the wrong place. The hunters wouldn't know if or when he was coming back to Zurich, so they wouldn't mount a stakeout from the street. An agent hanging out here for hours might attract attention from the police. This was a long-term assignment, one bored man in a window. Above his head were the 4 floors of the Opera Hotel. The corner rooms all looked down on the cafe entrance. He was sure that in one of those rooms a man was smoking in the darkness. Binoculars on the window ledge said he could grab them and zoom in on every face arriving at the restaurant. Bourne didn't give the waiter a face to see. He tucked his chin down and set out across the street, not looking over his shoulder. Whoever was manning the vigil in the hotel behind him would only observe the back of his head, not enough to match to a photograph or a description. Jason shoved his hands in his pockets, a man not worried about anyone spotting him, and headed directly for the cafe. He waved to a stranger on the sidewalk, as if he were a local out on the town, then shoved through the heavy door of the dry Alpenhauser and let it swing shut behind him. Jesus was all so familiar, as if no time had passed. The sharp aroma of raclette, the sing-song whine of the accordion, as an old man went from table to table playing his Bavarian music. The candles flickering on the faces of discreet lovers tucked into their booths. And not just lovers, this was a place to meet without being seen. 4 deals to be made for money to be exchanged under the table. That was why Cain had used it in the past. Herr Bourne, exclaimed the maitre d', returning to his podium near the front of the restaurant. He was a small man in a well-pressed suit, his hair gray, his mustache thin. What a pleasure to have you join us again. It's been some time now. Nothing ever changed here. The same faces, the same smiles. What was the man's name? Jason tried to pull it out of his memory. Yes, thank you, Simon, Bourne told him. I'm afraid my business hasn't taken me to Zurich for a while. I've missed it.